I had devoted 42 years of my life to Oakridge Hollow, never traveling farther than 60 miles from the modest home where I'd raised my 3 children. So when I received the certified letter informing me I'd won $925,000 in the Silverleaf State Lottery, I was certain it was an elaborate scam. But then the official check arrived, and suddenly at 71, I found myself with opportunities I'd never dared imagine, just when my own son decided I was too old to be included in his life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Margaret Thornfield, though most everyone in town calls me Maggie. My late husband Robert and I bought our little 2-bedroom bungalow on Willow Creek Lane back in 1981, when the neighborhood was still new and we were young parents full of dreams. We'd planned to move somewhere bigger as our family grew, but Robert's factory job never quite provided enough for that next step up, and then his heart attack at 52 changed everything. I raised our 3 children, Christopher, Rebecca, and Michael, in this house, watching as Oakridge Hollow gradually transformed around us. The mom-and-pop hardware store where Robert would spend Saturday mornings became a chain pharmacy. The meadow where the children would catch fireflies became the Maplewood Estates subdivision. Even Mrs. Donovan's bakery, where I'd buy birthday cakes for the children every year, eventually became one of those smartphone repair shops. Through it all, I remained, adapting as best I could. After Robert passed, I took 2 jobs, mornings at Oakridge Elementary as a cafeteria worker and evenings at the Rosewood Senior Center as an administrative assistant. The children were still in school then, and those paychecks barely stretched to cover our needs. There were no vacations, no luxuries, not even a modest dinner out unless it was someone's birthday. "Mom makes miracles with meatloaf," Christopher used to joke, not realizing how close to the truth he was. That single pound of ground beef stretched into 3 meals through my careful planning. The children grew up and moved away, as children do. Christopher, my eldest, became a marketing executive in Harborview Heights, a coastal city about 4 hours north. Rebecca settled in Ravenwood Hills with her husband James, working as an architect for a prestigious firm. Michael, my youngest, ventured furthest, establishing himself as a software engineer in Bridgewater Valley. They'd return for Christmas most years, occasionally for Thanksgiving, but those visits grew shorter and less frequent as their own families expanded. I understood. They had busy lives, important careers, children of their own who needed attention. If I felt a pang of loneliness watching their cars pull away, well, that was just part of being a mother, wasn't it? I filled my days with volunteer work after retirement. Tuesday mornings at the Oakridge Library reading to preschoolers. Thursday, afternoons delivering meals to homebound seniors through the Rosewood Center's outreach program. Sundays in the community garden, tending the vegetables that supplemented my modest pension. My calendar looked full, but the hours stretched long, especially in the evenings when the house grew quiet and the photographs on the mantel seemed to emphasize all that was missing. The lottery ticket had been an afterthought, purchased on a whim when I stopped for milk at Crestview Grocery. Dorothy, the cashier, had been telling me about her daughter's college acceptance when she paused mid-sentence. "Maggie, the jackpot's up to nearly $1 million. You ought to try your luck for once." I rarely gambled. Robert had always considered it wasteful. But something about Dorothy's enthusiasm made me fish out $5 from my carefully organized wallet. "Just 1 ticket," I told her, certain it would amount to nothing. For 2 weeks, that ticket sat forgotten on my refrigerator, held in place by a magnet shaped like a cardinal that Rebecca had made in 3rd grade. When I finally remembered to check the numbers during the evening news, the shock nearly sent me to the floor. I checked them 3 times, my hands trembling as I compared each digit, certain I must be mistaken. But there was no mistake. After taxes, I would receive $925,000, a sum so far beyond my comprehension that I sat at my kitchen table until midnight, trying to make sense of it. For a woman who had meticulously budgeted every penny for decades, who still saved bits of fee, aluminum foil, and washed plastic bags for reuse, the amount seemed almost obscene in its excess. I told no one at first. This windfall felt like a dream that might dissolve if spoken aloud. Instead, I made an appointment with Mr. Caldwell at Oakridge Community Bank, a kind man who had helped me restructure my mortgage after Robert passed. "Mrs. Thornfield, this changes everything for you," he said, reviewing the documentation. "We should discuss investment options, perhaps a trust for your grandchildren. Have you thought about how you'll use these funds?" I hadn't, not really. The practical considerations, paying off my mortgage, setting aside money for potential medical expenses, seemed obvious. But beyond that, what did a 71-year-old widow with arthritic knees and reading glasses do with sudden wealth? "I think I'd like to see my children," I said finally. "All of them together. It's been 5 years since we've all been in the same room." That evening, I called Christopher, my heart light with anticipation. His 10th wedding anniversary celebration was approaching, a weekend retreat at Pinehurst Lodge in the mountains, with extended family and close friends. Perhaps now I could offer to help with expenses, maybe even treat everyone to a special dinner. For once, I could be the one giving, rather than carefully navigating my limitations. "Christopher? It's Mom. I have some wonderful news to share." But Christopher's response was not what I had anticipated, and as our conversation unfolded, I felt my newfound joy begin to crumble beneath the weight of his words. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Mom, we've been talking it over, and we think it might be best if you sit this one out," Christopher said, his voice coated with that artificial sweetness he used for difficult clients, and apparently now, for his own. "Mother!" I gripped the phone tighter, the lottery check still sitting on my kitchen table where I'd placed it after returning from the bank. The paper seemed to glow under my dim kitchen light, a beacon of possibility suddenly dimming. "Sit out your anniversary celebration? But I've never missed a family gathering," I said, trying to keep the hurt from my voice. I was actually hoping to contribute something special this time. "I have some unexpected—" "The lodge is in the mountains, Mom," he interrupted. "The elevation is pretty high, and you know how your breathing gets when you're above 5,000 feet. Remember that trip to Denver to visit Uncle Stanley? You were uncomfortable the entire time. That trip had been 15 years ago, before I'd started using the inhaler that had resolved most of my mild asthma issues. I'd mentioned the discomfort exactly once, but apparently it had become family lore, evidence of my frailty. My breathing is fine now, Christopher. Dr. Whitman adjusted my medication years ago. It's not just that," he continued, plowing forward as if I hadn't spoken. "The weekend is packed with activities, kayaking on the lake, a 5-mile hike to Falcons Peak, dancing at the reception. Nicole's planned everything down to the minute. We're worried you'd feel left out or hold the group back." Hold the group back. The words stung like alcohol on an open cut. I'd raised 3 children as a single mother after Robert died, working 2 jobs, somehow managing to attend every soccer game, dance recital, and science fair. I'd gone without new clothes, dental work, or even basic car repairs to make sure they had what they needed for college. Now that they were successful, Christopher with his marketing firm, Rebecca designing eco-friendly buildings, Michael creating software for major companies, they'd decided I was an inconvenience. "I understand," I said quietly, though my heart was splintering. "You want it to be perfect." "Exactly." Relief flooded his voice, mistaking my resignation for agreement. "Plus, all the cabins are booked. It would be complicated to change things now. Maybe next year we'll plan something more age-appropriate." Age-appropriate. As if at 71, I could only be expected to handle shuffleboard and early bird specials. As if the woman who still volunteered 20 hours a week maintained a vegetable garden that was the envy of the neighborhood and had just completed a 5K charity walk last month was suddenly invalid. Of course, I murmured. I wouldn't want to complicate things. After promising to call again soon, Christopher hung up, leaving me in a kitchen that suddenly felt too quiet, too empty. I stared at the lottery check, the numbers blurring as tears filled my eyes. For years, I'd scraped by on my modest pension, always putting my children first. I'd never bought new furniture unless the old pieces were falling apart. I'd patched and repatched the same curtains. I'd never indulged in anything beyond occasional paperback novels from the secondhand bookstore on Cedar Street. The lottery win had felt like the universe finally saying, "Margaret, it's your turn now." But hearing Christopher's dismissal made me wonder if anything had really changed at all. Would I just keep this money in savings until I died, leaving it for children who couldn't even make room for me at an anniversary celebration? I was warming up leftover lentil soup that evening when my phone rang again. It was Rebecca, my middle child. "Hi, Mom," she said, her voice carrying that forced brightness that immediately put me on guard. "Christopher mentioned he talked to you about the anniversary weekend." "He did," I confirmed, stirring my soup slowly, watching the steam rise and curl. "It sounds like it will be lovely. It's just—" She hesitated. "With the kids running around and everyone doing activities, and the cabins being small, we're worried you'd be uncomfortable." "I see." The soup bubbled, reminding me it needed attention. I turned off the burner but remained standing at the stove. "We'll send lots of pictures," she offered, as if that were an adequate substitute for inclusion. "And I promise we'll visit soon. Maybe in the fall when the kids are back in school." "That would be nice." My responses had become automatic, the same placating phrases I'd used my whole life, even when I wasn't fine at all. "Good, good." She sounded relieved. "We just want what's best for you, Mom." After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table with my cooling soup, no longer hungry. The check still lay there, alongside a stack of bills I'd planned to pay off first thing tomorrow. My modest home needed repairs. The roof leaked in heavy rain, the water heater worked only intermittently, and the back porch steps had rotted through in places. Those would be the practical first uses of the money, I'd thought. But now, running my fingers over the check's raised lettering, I wondered if there might be another purpose for this unexpected windfall. I pulled out an old photo album from the bookshelf, its cover faded and corners worn from years of handling. Inside were photographs of all 3 children at various ages. Christopher taking his first steps across this very kitchen floor. Rebecca proudly displaying her science fair ribbon. Michael in his graduation cap and gown. In most photos, I stood beside them, encouraging, supporting, celebrating. But now, apparently, I was inconvenient, too old, a burden. The next morning, I called my friend Eleanor, who lived 3 doors down. We'd been neighbors for over 30 years, since she and her husband George had moved in when our children were still in elementary school. George had passed just 2 years after Robert, creating a bond of shared widowhood between us. "Can you believe it?" I asked after explaining the situation with Christopher's anniversary weekend. "They don't want their old mother ruining their fun with my breathing problems and slow walking." Eleanor clicked her tongue against her teeth in disapproval. "Have you told them about the lottery win?" "No," I admitted, looking out my kitchen window at the bird feeder Robert had built decades ago. I was saving it as a surprise. I thought maybe I could help with the celebration expenses, perhaps pay for a special dinner or activities for the grandchildren. And now? I looked down, at my hands lined with decades of hard work, blue veins prominent beneath thin skin. Now I'm wondering if I should spend it all on myself. Eleanor laughed, a bright sound that momentarily lifted my spirits. Well, wouldn't that be something? Margaret Thornfield finally putting herself first after all these years. That afternoon, I received a group text from my children discussing final arrangements for the anniversary weekend at Pinehurst Lodge. They'd forgotten to remove me from the thread. As I scrolled through their messages, my breath caught when I saw what Michael had written. Did anyone talk to Mom about not coming? We can't have her showing up and slowing everyone down. Last Christmas, she kept asking us to adjust the thermostat and complained about the music being too loud. So awkward with Nicole's parents there. Rebecca had replied. Handled it. Told her the cabins were full and she'd be uncomfortable with the activities. She bought it. I feel bad, though, Michael responded. She seems lonely lately. We can send her pictures, Christopher wrote. Maybe visit her on the way back if there's time. If there's time. After everything I had sacrificed for them, I'd become an afterthought, someone to fit in if convenient. I set down my phone, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of decades of self-sacrifice lifting, of always putting my children's needs and wants above my own. I thought about all the dreams I'd deferred, places I'd wanted to see, things I'd wanted to do. The cooking classes I'd abandoned when the children needed braces, the community college, courses in literature I'd dropped when tuition payments came due, the trip to the Grand Canyon. Robert and I had planned but never taken because someone always needed something more important. Slowly, deliberately, I picked up my laptop, a 5-year-old model that Christopher had handed down when he upgraded, and opened a browser window. First, I researched Pinehurst Lodge, identifying exactly when my children would be gathering and what accommodations were available. Then I made a reservation at Evergreen Peaks Resort, a significantly more upscale property just 2 miles from Pinehurst, for the exact dates of the anniversary celebration. Next, I made an appointment at Luminous, Oakridge Hollow's most exclusive boutique, for a complete wardrobe refresh. I'd never set foot in the place before, having always shopped at discount stores or thrift shops for my clothing needs. Finally, I called Eleanor again. Pack your bags, I told her, a smile spreading across my face. Not bitter, not angry, but liberated. We're going to the mountains. What about your children? She asked. They think they know their mother, I replied, feeling a surge of anticipation I hadn't experienced in years. They're about to meet Margaret 2-0. Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The following day, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. For so long, my life had revolved around my children's needs, wants, and schedules, even after they'd flown the nest and built lives of their own. Now, with nearly $1 million sitting in my newly opened bank account, I finally had the freedom to choose for myself. My first stop was Luminous Boutique, Oakridge Hollow's most upscale clothing store. In all my 71 years, I'd never stepped foot inside. The few times I'd walked past its elegant window displays with their stylish mannequins, I'd glance down at my own sensible discount store attire before hurrying along, feeling out of place just looking through the glass. Welcome to Luminous, greeted a sophisticated woman with silver-streaked dark hair. Her name tag read, Vivian. Can I help you find something specific today? I straightened my spine, surprised at how nervous I felt. I need a complete wardrobe. Refresh. Resort wear, evening attire, casual elegance. Price is no object. Her eyebrows rose slightly, and I saw her taking in my faded cardigan and practical loafers with new interest. To her credit, she recovered quickly. Absolutely. May I ask what occasion you're shopping for? A mountain resort visit, I replied. Not mentioning it coincided with my son's anniversary gathering. I want to make quite an impression. For the next 3 hours, Vivian guided me through selections I would never have dared try on my own. Silk blouses in vibrant colors, tailored linen pants, flowing maxi dresses, and elegant evening wear that bore no resemblance to the practical, forgettable clothes that had filled my closet for decades. This sapphire blue is stunning with your eyes, Vivian said as I emerged from the dressing room in a wrap dress that draped flatteringly over my figure. Most women your age shy away from bold colors, but you should absolutely embrace them. Women your age. There it was again, that subtle categorization, the box my children had placed me in. But unlike them, Vivian wasn't dismissing me because of it. She was helping me redefine it. I bought the sapphire dress along with 14 other outfits, 4 pairs of shoes, and accessories I'd never dreamed of owning. When Vivian totaled the purchase, the amount would have given the old Margaret a heart attack. The new Margaret simply handed over her card with a smile. "Will your family be surprised to see your new look?" Vivian asked as she carefully packaged my purchases in the boutique's signature silver bags with lavender tissue paper. "Shocked is more like it," I replied. "They don't know I'm coming. They also don't know about my recent financial windfall." She paused, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Well, they're in for quite a revelation, aren't they?" As I loaded the elegant shopping bags into my 12-year-old sedan, my phone rang. It was Michael, my youngest. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice carrying that slightly elevated pitch he used when he felt guilty about something. "Rebecca mentioned she talked to you about the anniversary arrangements." "Yes, she did," I replied, trying to maneuver the shopping bags to fit in my trunk without crushing the delicate fabrics inside. "I just wanted to check in and see how you're doing with everything." "I'm fine, dear," I said automatically, the response I'd given my whole life, even when I wasn't fine at all. "Good, good," he paused. "The thing is, Mom, we're trying to make this weekend special for Christopher and Nicole. Everyone will be focused on activities. The kids will be running around. We're just worried you'd be uncomfortable." I closed my trunk and leaned against the car, looking up at the clear blue September sky. "I understand completely, Michael. Actually, I've been thinking of taking a little getaway myself. Perhaps visit the mountains." "The mountains?" His voice sharpened with suspicion. "Anywhere specific?" "I was thinking about the Evergreen Valley area. I hear it's lovely this time of year." There was a pause. "Mom, that's where Pinehurst Lodge is. Is this your way of saying you're planning to show up at the anniversary weekend anyway?" "What a coincidence," I said innocently. "I had no idea that's where you all would be gathering. You know I've always wanted to see the changing leaves in the mountains." "Mom," his voice took on that patronizing tone my children had all perfected in recent years, the one they used when they thought I was being difficult or confused. "Please don't show up unannounced. That would be awkward for everyone, especially Christopher and Nicole. Why don't you plan your trip for another time? Maybe when the crowds are smaller and it would be easier for someone your age to get around." After we hung up, I sat in my car for a few minutes, processing the conversation. Someone your age. The phrase echoed in my mind, joining a growing collection of similar dismissals. Too old, age-appropriate, uncomfortable, slow. When had my children started seeing me as decrepit rather than simply older? When had they begun making decisions for me rather than with me? My next stop was Eleanor's tidy bungalow with its cheerful yellow door and garden gnomes standing sentry by the flower beds. Unlike my practical, modest home, Eleanor's cottage reflected her vibrant personality. Wind chimes tinkling from the porch rafters, flower boxes bursting with late-season blooms, and a welcome mat that read, "If you've brought wine, you're welcome. Any time." Eleanor opened the door before I could knock, her eyes widening at the shopping bags in my arms. "Good heavens, Maggie! Did you buy out the entire store?" I grinned, feeling lighter than I had in months. "Pretty close." Over tea in her cozy kitchen, a much more updated space than mine, with the granite countertops she'd treated herself to. After George's life insurance payout, I laid out my plan. Eleanor and I would drive to Evergreen Valley 2 days before the anniversary weekend. We'd check into Evergreen Peaks Resort, a place far more luxurious than Pinehurst Lodge, though they didn't know I knew that detail. And then, when they least expected it, I would make my entrance. You're really going through with this? Eleanor asked, stirring honey into her tea. What if they're upset? They excluded me, I reminded her. Decided I was too old and frail to be included in their precious activities. Too embarrassing to have around Nicole's parents. Eleanor winced. That text message was cruel. It was honest, I replied, running my finger along the rim of my teacup. They've never talked to me that way directly. Now I know what they really think. I looked up at my oldest friend. And the lottery win. When will you tell them about that? I smiled slowly. When it creates the maximum impact. That evening, I received another call. This time from Rebecca, catching me just as I was reviewing the resort spa services online, considering treatments I'd never imagined indulging in before. Mom, Michael tells me you're planning to visit Evergreen Valley during Christopher's anniversary weekend, she said without preamble, her architect's precision evident in how directly she approached the issue. Oh, did he? I kept my voice neutral, scrolling through descriptions of hot stone massages and aromatherapy facials. Look, I know you're disappointed, but showing up uninvited would make everyone uncomfortable. The schedule is packed with physical activities. The evenings are adults-only events. It's not going to be the relaxed family gathering you're imagining. I took a deep breath. I understand, Rebecca, but Evergreen Valley is a public destination. If I happen to book a stay at the same time you're all there, that's my choice. Mom. Her voice took on the firm tone she used with her contractors when they missed a deadline. We've already discussed this as a family. The decision is made. Yes, I said softly. You've made your decision, and I've made mine. After hanging up, I sat on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. The same swing where I'd rocked each of my children as babies, where I'd listened to their teenage problems, where I'd comforted them through breakups and celebrated their achievements. For decades, I'd lived according to others' expectations and needs. I'd been the mother who never complained, who always said she was fine, even when she wasn't. The one who wore outdated clothes so her children could have the latest styles, who drove an old car so they could have college tuition, who postponed dreams so they could pursue theirs. Not anymore. My phone buzzed with a text from Christopher. Mom, please don't make this difficult. Everyone agrees you should sit this one out. Next year will be better timing. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my computer and began researching activities at Evergreen Peaks Resort. Guided nature walks. Caught my eye. Something I'd enjoyed as a young woman but hadn't done in decades. I booked a slot for my second day there. Next, I reserved a table for two at Altitude, the resort's upscale restaurant known for its panoramic views of the valley. For the evening, I knew my family would be arriving at Pinehurst Lodge. The perfect setting for them to spot their supposedly homebound mother enjoying a sophisticated dinner with her friend. The following day, I visited Oakridge Community Bank for another meeting with Mr. Caldwell to discuss my new financial situation in more detail. He'd known me for over 20 years, since the difficult days after Robert's death when I was struggling to keep our home. Mrs. Thornfield, I've been reviewing your accounts, he said, clearly still amazed by my good fortune. This is truly life-changing. Money. Have you given more thought to how you'd like to allocate these funds? I want some of it accessible for immediate use, I explained. The rest I'd like to invest wisely. He nodded, pulling up various options on his computer screen. And your children? Will you be setting up anything for them or your grandchildren? The question gave me pause. Just a week ago, I would have immediately replied that most of the money would go toward helping my family, paying off Rebecca's remaining student loans, contributing to my grandchildren's college funds, perhaps helping Michael with the down payment on the house he and his wife had been saving for. For now, I said carefully, I'd like to keep this between us. My children don't know about my good fortune yet, Mr. Caldwell raised an eyebrow but nodded. Of course. Client confidentiality is paramount. As he walked me through investment options, I found myself engaging with finances in a way I never had before. I'd always been cautious with money out of necessity, but I'd never had the luxury of thinking about growth, returns, or legacies. You know, Mr. Caldwell said as we wrapped up, you're handling this windfall more sensibly than most people I've seen. Many get overwhelmed and make impulsive decisions they later regret. I've waited a long time to have choices, I replied. I'm not going to waste them. When I returned home, there was a voicemail from Christopher. Mom, we need to talk about this Evergreen Valley idea. Call me back. I deleted it without returning the call. That night, as I packed my new clothes, for the trip, I found myself humming, an old habit I'd nearly forgotten. In the quiet of my bedroom, surrounded by silk and linen I'd never dreamed of owning, I felt something unfamiliar stirring in my chest. Anticipation. For decades, I'd lived for others. Now, I was about to live for myself. The morning of our departure dawned bright and clear. Eleanor arrived at my house in her well-maintained silver SUV, honking twice as was her custom. I wheeled my new burgundy leather suitcase onto the porch, another indulgence I'd never have considered before the lottery win, and locked my front door with a decisive click. Ready for Operation Family Shock? Eleanor called through her open window, sunglasses perched on her head and a mischievous smile lighting her face. More than ready, I replied, feeling a surprising lightness as Eleanor helped load my substantial luggage into her vehicle. The drive to Evergreen Valley would take about 3 hours, winding through countryside I'd seen in photographs but rarely in person. As Oakridge Hollow faded in the rearview mirror, I felt an unexpected sense of liberation. For the first time in memory, I was leaving town without a single child-related errand or responsibility. You're smiling, Eleanor observed, glancing away from the road momentarily. Am I? I touched my face, surprised to find she was right. It's been a while since I've seen that expression, she said, returning her attention to the highway. A genuine Maggie smile. Been too long. I hadn't realized how visible my unhappiness had become, how the weight of my children's subtle dismissals had dimmed my spirit over the years. Each time they canceled a visit, each time they talked over me at family gatherings, each time they made decisions about my life without consulting me. Small cuts that had accumulated into a significant wound. Tell me about the resort, Eleanor said, changing the subject as we merged onto the interstate. I pulled out the brochure I'd printed. Evergreen Peaks Resort sits on a ridgeline overlooking the valley. 15 luxury cabins and a main lodge with additional suites. 3 restaurants, a full-service spa, guided outdoor activities, evening entertainment in the lounge. The works? Sounds fancy for a family gathering, Eleanor remarked, adjusting the air conditioning. That's my children, I sighed. Nothing but the best, especially now that they can afford it. Christopher's handling the arrangements at Pinehurst, probably covering more than his share so he can play the generous one. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. You sound bitter, Maggie. Not bitter, I corrected her, watching the landscape change as we drove farther from town. Just seeing clearly for the first time. As we traveled, I found myself recounting stories about my children that I'd never fully processed. How Christopher had helped me buy a new phone last year, then set it up with simplified settings because the regular ones would be too complicated for me, despite the fact that I'd been using computers since before he was born. How Rebecca had started referring to me as sweetie in that condescending tone. How Michael had begun explaining basic concepts to me like I'd never encountered them before. They weren't always like this, I said, gazing out the window at the passing landscape, farms giving way to more wooded areas as we approached the foothills. When did they start seeing me as less than capable? Probably around the time they became more successful than their mother, Eleanor observed. Makes them feel better to think they've surpassed you in every way, including basic competence. Her words stung with their accuracy. My children had all surpassed me financially and professionally, which was exactly what I'd worked for. But somewhere along the way, they'd concluded that my modest life meant a modest mind. We stopped for lunch at a charming roadside cafe in a small town I'd never visited before. As we sat on the patio enjoying sandwiches and iced tea, I received a group text from Christopher. Just finalized the reunion schedule. Arrival Thursday evening. Welcome dinner at 7 Friday, hiking and lake activities. Saturday resort day, spa for the ladies, golf for the men. Sunday morning farewell brunch. Can't wait to see everyone. Below, it was a photo of Pinehurst Lodge, a rustic but elegant building, nestled among tall pines. Rebecca replied with heart emojis. Michael added, booked our flights, arriving Thursday at 2. Several in-laws and my grandchildren chimed in with their excitement. Once again, I'd been left in the group chat by mistake. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd forgotten to remove me from their digital reunion just as they had excluded me from the physical one. They're arriving tomorrow evening, I told Eleanor, showing her the text. Perfect timing for our dinner reservation at altitude. Eleanor grinned. You've turned into quite the strategist, Maggie. Who knew retirement was just preparing you for your true calling as a tactical genius? Back on the road, the landscape began to change dramatically. Oakridge Hollow was situated in gently rolling countryside, but now we were climbing into proper foothills that would eventually become mountains. The trees grew taller, the air noticeably cooler and fresher through the open windows. I've never seen real mountains before, I admitted, watching the peaks grow larger on the horizon. Never in 71 years. Eleanor seemed shocked. Seriously? Not even on vacation? There was never time, I explained. When the children were young, I couldn't afford vacations. When they got older, any travel I did was to visit them in their cities, and none of them live near mountains. Well, that changes now, Eleanor declared. Welcome to your new life, Margaret Thornfield. May it be full of mountains, lakes, and other things you've never seen before. By mid-afternoon, we were winding along roads that hugged the mountainsides, offering breathtaking views of Evergreen Valley below. The trees were just beginning to show hints of autumn colors, touches of gold and red among the deep greens. A river glinted in the distance, snaking through the valley floor. It's more beautiful than the pictures, I breathed, pressing my face closer to the window like an excited child. When we pulled into Evergreen Peaks Resort, I momentarily wondered if we'd made a mistake. The main lodge was a grand structure of timber and stone with soaring windows that reflected the mountain vista. Well-dressed people strolled the manicured grounds, and uniformed staff appeared immediately to assist with luggage. Mrs. Thornfield, a young man in an impeccable uniform, approached when I gave my name at the reception desk. We have you in the Valley View Suite. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your accommodations. I exchanged a wide-eyed glance with Eleanor as we followed him through the elegant lobby with its massive stone fireplace and antler chandeliers. The resort was even more luxurious than I'd anticipated. I'd booked the suite on impulse, wanting to splurge with my new fortune, but now I wondered if I'd gone too far. Those doubts vanished when we entered the suite. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased a breathtaking view of the valley and mountains beyond. A living area with plush furniture faced a river rock fireplace. A private balcony held 2 deep chairs and a small table. The bedroom featured a king-sized bed draped in crisp white linens, and the bathroom boasted a deep soaking tub and separate rainfall shower. Will this be satisfactory? The attendant asked with a knowing smile. It's perfect, I managed, still taking it all in. After he left, Eleanor flopped onto the sofa. Good grief, Maggie. This place is fit for royalty. What does a room like this cost per night? I named the figure, and she whistled low. Your children have no idea what they're in for, do they? None whatsoever, I confirmed, stepping out onto the balcony to breathe in the pine-scented air. From this vantage point, I could see most of the resort grounds. To the north stood Pinehurst Lodge, a smaller but still impressive property about 2 miles away as the crow flies. Directly below was the outdoor dining terrace of Altitude Restaurant, where we had reservations for tomorrow evening. For the remainder of the afternoon, Eleanor and I explored the resort. We walked along the nature trails, peeked into the spa, where I had treatments booked for the following morning, and studied the activity board to confirm the time of my guided hike. "I can't believe you're really going on a mountain hike," Eleanor said as we made our way back to our suite to prepare for dinner. "Aren't you nervous? It's been decades since you've done anything like that." "Terrified," I admitted. "But that's rather the point, isn't it? Doing things that my children believe I'm too old and frail to attempt." That evening, we dined at the resort's casual restaurant, a rustic tavern with hearty mountain fare. Over a bottle of wine, another small luxury I rarely allowed myself, we finalized our strategy for the following day. Spa in the morning, guided, hike in the afternoon, and then the grand reveal at dinner, Eleanor recited. "And when exactly do you plan to drop the lottery bombshell?" "I'm still deciding," I replied, swirling the ruby liquid in my glass. "It depends on how they react to seeing me here. I want to understand exactly who they are when they're confronted with the mother they tried to discard." Back in our suite, I stood before the bathroom mirror in my new silk pajamas, studying my reflection. My silver hair, usually pulled back in a practical bun, now fell softly around my shoulders. My face, while lined with the evidence of 71 years of life, looked somehow different, more vibrant, more present. "There you are, Margaret," I whispered to my reflection. "I've missed you." That night, I slept better than I had in years, cradled in luxury and the knowledge that tomorrow would change everything. No more invisible Margaret. No more dismissed Margaret. No more irrelevant Margaret. Tomorrow, my children would meet the woman their mother had always been beneath the sacrifice and service. Strong, capable, and now, unexpectedly, formidable. I awoke to sunshine streaming through the curtains I'd left partially open. For a moment, I was disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The plush bedding, the elegant furnishings, the spectacular view framed by floor-to-ceiling windows. Then I remembered where I was and why, and a small thrill ran through me. Today was the day my children would arrive at Pinehurst Lodge. Today was the day they would discover that their too-old mother wasn't sitting at home knitting, as they'd assumed. I ordered room service breakfast, another luxury I'd never allowed myself, and Eleanor and I enjoyed fresh fruit, fluffy omelets, and rich coffee on our private balcony. The valley stretched below us, misty in the morning light, with mountains rising majestically on the opposite side. "What time is your spa appointment?" Eleanor asked, spreading jam on a croissant. 10 o'clock. I've booked the mountain renewal package. Massage, facial, manicure, pedicure, and hairstyling. I sipped my coffee, savoring the perfect strength and temperature. "And my guided hike is at 2. Eleanor shook her head with amused disbelief. "I still can't believe you're doing this. The old Margaret would never have been so bold." "I was going. To say vindictive?" she replied with a raised eyebrow. "But bold works too." "It's not vindictive to stand up for yourself," I said quietly. "They hurt me, Eleanor. Deeply. Not just by excluding me from the reunion, but by how they've been treating me for years. Like I'm already half gone. Like my only value is in what I can give them." Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You don't have to justify yourself to me. I've watched how they've changed toward you. Just don't lose sight of what you really want from this confrontation." "And what's that?" "Respect," she said simply. "Not revenge." Her words stayed with me as I headed to my spa appointment. I'd booked the resort's signature renewal package, drawn to the name as much as the services it included. Renewal. Exactly what I needed. Not just physically, but in how my children perceived me, in how I perceived myself. The spa was a sanctuary of natural stone, flowing water, and soft music. As I surrendered to the skilled hands of the massage therapist, I felt decades of tension begin to melt away. Tension I hadn't even realized I was carrying. The weight of single motherhood, the strain of constant financial struggle, the hurt of gradual dismissal by my own children. "You're carrying a lot in your shoulders," the therapist commented as she worked on a particularly stubborn knot. "That's 71 years worth," I replied. After the massage came the facial, where the esthetician analyzed my skin with professional interest. "Your skin has wonderful elasticity for your age," she observed, "but you've been neglecting it. No regular skincare routine?" I almost laughed. My skincare routine had always consisted of whatever drugstore moisturizer was on sale. "I've been focusing on other priorities," I said diplomatically. "Well, it's never too late to start," she assured me, applying various serums and creams that smelled of herbs and flowers. By the time I moved on to the manicure and pedicure, I felt like a new woman. Lighter, smoother, more radiant from the inside out. The nail technician, a young woman named Jade, chatted cheerfully as she worked. "Are you here for a special occasion?" she asked, applying a base coat to my nails. "A family reunion of sorts," I replied. "How wonderful. We get a lot of those here. Which color would you prefer?" I studied the rainbow of options before selecting a shade I would never have chosen in my previous life. A rich, vibrant crimson that reminded me of the cardinal that visited my bird feeder every morning. "Bold choice," Jade approved. Most of my older clients stick to neutrals or pale pinks. There it was again, that subtle categorization. Most older clients. But unlike in the past, I didn't feel diminished by it. Instead, I felt a small satisfaction in defying the expectation. "I'm trying something new," I explained. The final stop was the salon, where a stylist named Antonio studied my silver hair with an artist's eye. "Such beautiful natural color," he said. "Many women pay a fortune for this shade. What were you thinking of having done today?" In the past, I would have requested something simple and practical, a trim, perhaps a quick blow-dry. But the woman, in the mirror looking back at me with her glowing skin and vibrant nails, seemed to call for something more. "I trust your judgment," I said. "Something elegant but modern. I want to look like myself, just enhanced." Antonio's eyes lit up at the creative freedom. "I know exactly what will frame your face beautifully." 90 minutes later, I hardly recognized my reflection. Antonio had given my previously one-length hair layers that softened my features and added volume. Instead of my usual severe part, he had created a side-swept style that was both sophisticated and youthful. "What do you think?" he asked, turning the chair so I could see the back. "I think my children won't know who I am," I replied honestly. After the spa, I returned to the suite to change for my guided hike. Eleanor was lounging on the balcony with a novel she'd brought, but she looked up when I entered and gasped. "Margaret Thornfield, is that really you?" I did a small twirl, feeling surprisingly girlish. The new and improved version. "You look incredible," she said, studying me from head to toe. "That hair, and your skin is glowing." I glanced at my watch. No time to chat. I need to change for my hike. I selected lightweight hiking pants and a moisture-wicking top from my new wardrobe, completing the look with proper hiking boots I'd purchased specifically for this trip. The old Margaret would have worried about getting such expensive clothes dirty or whether the activity would be too strenuous. The new Margaret simply wanted to experience the mountains properly, to prove to herself, and eventually to her children, what this old woman was capable of. The hiking group assembled in the resort lobby, 8 guests of varying ages and a guide named Carson, a weathered man in his 50s who assessed each of us with professional interest. "Welcome to our Aspen Ridge hike," he greeted us. "This is a moderate trail with some elevation gain, about 3 miles round trip. We'll take it at a comfortable pace with plenty of stops to appreciate the flora, fauna, and views. Any questions before we begin?" A younger woman raised her hand. "I have asthma. Will that be a problem?" Carson shook his head. "Not at all. Just let me know if you need to catch your breath. We're not racing today." I thought of Christopher's comment about my breathing issues from 15 years ago, the excuse he'd used to exclude me from the weekend, and felt a wave of vindication. This guide, a stranger, was more accommodating of potential limitations than my own son. The trail began gently enough, winding through a stand of aspen trees whose leaves trembled golden in the afternoon light. Carson stopped frequently to point out interesting plants, wildlife signs, and geological features. I was surprised to find that while the hiking required effort, I wasn't struggling as I'd feared. My regular walks and garden work in Oakridge Hollow had maintained more strength and stamina than I'd given myself credit for. "You're doing great," commented a man about my age who was hiking with his adult daughter. "Is this your first time in the mountains?" "First time hiking," I confirmed. "I'm discovering I rather enjoy it." "Mom's putting me to shame," his daughter laughed. "I'm already winded and she's practically skipping up the trail." As we climbed higher, the views became increasingly spectacular. The valley spread out below us, a patchwork of forests and meadows, with the river winding through like a silver ribbon. In the distance, I could make out both resorts, Evergreen Peaks, where we were staying, and Pinehurst Lodge, where my children would now be arriving. "That's our destination," Carson said, pointing to a rocky outcropping about a quarter-mile ahead. "Aspen Ridge, one of the best views in the valley. We'll rest there before heading back down." The final push to the ridge was the steepest part of the hike, requiring more careful footing and deeper breathing. I focused on placing one foot in front of the other, using the hiking pole Carson had provided, and pausing when needed. The sense of accomplishment when I reached the top alongside the others, not lagging behind, not needing special assistance, filled me with quiet pride. "Well done, everyone," Carson said as the group gathered on the ridge. "Take some time to enjoy the view, have some water, take photos. We'll head back down in about 15 minutes. I stood at the edge of the ridge, gazing out at the panorama of mountains and valleys. The autumn colors were more vivid from this height, patches of gold, orange, and red blazing among the evergreens. The air was crisp and clean, filling my lungs with a purity I'd never experienced before. For a moment, I wished Robert could have seen this with me. He'd always talked about taking me to the mountains someday, once the children were grown and we had more time, more money. That day had never come for him. But I was here now, living enough for both of us. As I turned to rejoin the group, a flash of familiar color caught my eye. A small caravan of vehicles was winding up the road to Pinehurst Lodge, visible in the distance. A dark blue SUV led the procession, Christopher's vehicle, which I recognized immediately. My family was arriving, right on schedule according to the itinerary I'd seen in their group text. Soon they would be settling into their cabins, unpacking for the weekend celebration, blissfully unaware that their mother was less than 2 miles away, not quietly knitting in her living room in Oakridge Hollow, but standing triumphant atop a mountain ridge. The thought brought a smile to my face as I rejoined the hiking group for our descent. By the time I returned to the resort, I was pleasantly tired, but exhilarated. I found Eleanor waiting in our suite, eager to hear about my adventure. "You did it," she exclaimed when I described reaching the ridge. "I did," I confirmed, unable to keep the pride from my voice. "And I saw them arriving at Pinehurst while I was at the top. Perfect timing." "Speaking of timing," Eleanor checked her watch, "we should start getting ready for dinner. Your grand entrance awaits." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So, if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. For dinner at altitude, I selected my most striking new outfit, the sapphire blue wrap dress that Vivian had admired at Luminous, paired with a delicate silver necklace and matching earrings I'd purchased with my lottery winnings. The dress draped flatteringly over my figure, which had remained slim, though certainly not youthful. My newly styled hair framed my face softly, and I applied makeup with a lighter hand than usual, just enough to enhance without masking. When I emerged from the bedroom, Eleanor gave a low whistle of appreciation. "If your children walked past you right now, they wouldn't recognize you," she said. "That's rather the point," I replied, slipping on silver sandals with a modest heel. Altitude Restaurant occupied a spectacular position on the main lodge's top floor, with a wall of windows overlooking the valley, and a terrace for outdoor dining in warmer weather. I'd reserved a prime table near the windows, perfectly situated to be seen by anyone entering or exiting the restaurant. The maitre d' greeted us warmly. "Mrs. Thornfield, your table is ready. Please follow me." As we were led through the elegant dining room, I was acutely aware of glances from other diners. Not the dismissive looks I'd grown accustomed to as an elderly woman, but interested observations of my appearance, my confident stride, my evident belonging in this upscale setting. Our table was even better than I'd hoped, positioned near the entrance but with an unobstructed view of the valley, now golden in the early evening light. In the distance, Pinehurst Lodge was visible, its windows beginning to glow as darkness approached. "The sunset view from here is spectacular," our server informed us as he presented the wine list. "May I suggest a bottle of the Willamette Valley Pinot Noir to enjoy while you review the menu?" The old Margaret would have declined such an indulgence. The new Margaret simply nodded. "That sounds perfect." As we settled in with our wine, I found myself scanning the dining room for familiar faces. Altitude was undoubtedly the finest restaurant in the valley. If my children decided to venture beyond Pinehurst Lodge for a pre-celebration dinner, this would be the logical choice. "Are you nervous?" Eleanor asked, noting my vigilance. "Not nervous," I replied, taking a sip of the excellent wine. "Just ready. I've been invisible to them for too long." The sun began its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. As darkness softly fell, the restaurant was illuminated with tasteful lighting and small candles. At each table, the effect was magical, intimate yet festive. We ordered our meals, seared scallops for me, wild mushroom risotto for Eleanor, and continued our observation of arriving guests. My anticipation grew with each passing minute. Would my children come to Altitude for their welcome dinner, or had they arranged something private at Pinehurst? Then, just as our appetizers arrived, I saw them. Christopher entered first, his 6-foot frame immediately recognizable to me despite the distance. He was followed by his wife Nicole, her blonde hair swept up elegantly. Behind them came Michael, and his wife Stephanie, then Rebecca with her husband James. They were dressed for a special occasion, the men in sports jackets, the women in cocktail attire. A host was leading them toward a large table at the opposite end of the restaurant. They would have to walk directly past our table to reach it. My heart began to race, but I kept my posture relaxed, lifting my wine glass in a leisurely manner as if I hadn't noticed them at all. Eleanor, facing away from the approaching group, raised her eyebrows in silent question. I gave an almost imperceptible nod. She smiled and continued our conversation, playing her part perfectly. "So I told George's sister that if she wanted to rearrange my garden club schedule, she'd have to consult with me first," she was saying, her voice carrying just enough to sound natural. 75 years old and still trying to manage everyone around her? I laughed at her story, a genuine laugh, though fueled by the mounting tension of the moment. And that's when Christopher spotted me. I saw the exact moment recognition dawned on his face. He stopped mid-stride, causing Nicole to bump into him slightly. His expression transformed from casual enjoyment to stunned disbelief. "Mom?" he said, his voice carrying across the now quieter restaurant. I turned my head with calculated casualness, as if just noticing him. Christopher! What a lovely surprise. The others had caught up now, forming a tableau of astonishment. Rebecca's mouth actually hung open. Michael stood blinking rapidly as if trying to clear his vision. Their spouses looked confused, glancing between my children and me with uncertainty. "What are you doing here?" Christopher managed, still frozen in place. "Several feet from our table. Having dinner," I replied simply, gesturing to our appetizers. "The scallops are divine. Eleanor and I are treating ourselves to a little mountain getaway." "But how?" Rebecca sputtered, finding her voice. "You're supposed to be in Oakridge." I raised an eyebrow. "Am I? I don't recall making that promise." The maitre d', sensing an unusual situation, approached with professional smoothness. "Is everything all right with your party, sir? Your table is ready." "Yes, fine," Christopher said automatically, though his eyes never left my face. "These are my parents," he finished awkwardly, clearly struggling to process my unexpected presence and transformed appearance. "How wonderful," the maître d' said. "Would you prefer to dine together? We could rearrange—" "That won't be necessary," I interjected smoothly. "We've already ordered, and I'm sure they have their own celebration planned. This is just a happy coincidence." Eleanor, bless her, raised her wine glass. "But perhaps a toast to the anniversary couple? Congratulations, Christopher and Nicole." 10 years, isn't it?" Nicole, recovering better than my children, managed a smile. "Yes, thank you. 10 years next month, actually. This weekend is the early celebration with family." An awkward silence fell. My children continued to stare at me as if I were an apparition, or perhaps more accurately, a stranger wearing their mother's face. I knew what they were seeing, not the practical, predictable woman in sensible shoes and dated clothing, but someone unrecognizably elegant, confident, and seemingly at home in luxury. "Well," James, Rebecca's husband, finally broke the silence, "we should probably get to our table. Lovely to see you, Margaret. You look different." "Thank you, James," I smiled. "I feel different." My children allowed themselves to be led away, throwing backward glances at me as they went. I maintained my composure, turning back to Eleanor once they had reached their table. "That," she whispered, "was priceless. Their faces." I took a sip of water to steady myself. My heart was still racing, but not from anxiety, from a strange, fierce joy. "The evening has just begun," I replied. Throughout dinner, I could feel their eyes on me. Their table was positioned in such a way that at least one of them had a clear view of me at all times, and they took turns watching, whispering among themselves. I pretended not to notice, giving my full attention to Eleanor and our excellent meal. When our server brought the dessert menus, I saw Michael rise from their table and approach ours. He had always been the most diplomatic of my children, the mediator in family disputes. "Mom," he said, stopping beside me, "could I talk to you for a moment?" I gestured to the empty chair at our table. "Of course." He sat awkwardly, glancing at Eleanor, who very deliberately became absorbed in the dessert options. "What's going on?" he asked in a low voice. "How are you here, and—" He gestured vaguely at my appearance. "I decided I wanted to see the mountains." I replied calmly. "As I told you on the phone, I've always wanted to visit Evergreen Valley." "But we specifically asked you not to come," he said, frustration edging into his tone. "We explained why it wasn't a good idea." I met his gaze directly. "No, Michael. You told me I was too old, too slow, and too much of an embarrassment to be included in a family gathering. You didn't ask anything." He had the grace to flush slightly. "That's not fair. We were concerned about your comfort with all the planned activities." "My comfort," I echoed, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "I hiked Aspen Ridge today, Michael. 3 miles, moderate elevation gain. I wasn't the youngest in the group, but I certainly wasn't struggling to keep up. His eyes widened in genuine surprise. You went hiking? But your breathing has been well managed for years, I finished for him. Just one of many things you apparently don't know about your mother. He looked at me for a long moment, taking in the changes, not just in my appearance but in my demeanor. The usual deference was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence he clearly hadn't expected. There's something else going on, he said finally. This isn't just about the reunion. I smiled slightly. You're right, but this isn't the time or place for that conversation. He glanced back at his siblings, who were watching our interaction, with undisguised interest. Will you at least come say hello to everyone? The kids are back at Pinehurst with the sitter, but they'd love to see their grandmother tomorrow. I considered his request. Part of me, the old Margaret, wanted to acquiesce immediately, grateful for any inclusion. But the new Margaret recognized this for what it was, damage control. They were embarrassed, caught in their exclusion of me, and now wanted to save face. I have plans tomorrow, I said, which was true. But perhaps we could meet for lunch, 1 hour at the Evergreen Peaks Terrace Cafe? You and your siblings without spouses or children. I think we have some things to discuss. Michael hesitated, clearly thrown by my setting conditions rather than gratefully accepting his olive branch. I'll talk to Christopher and Rebecca, he said finally. But I think we can make that work. After he returned to his table, Eleanor raised her eyebrows. Well played, she murmured, setting the terms rather than jumping at their invitation. This isn't how I imagined the evening unfolding, I admitted. I expected more confrontation, less... I searched for the word, confusion. You've disrupted their narrative, Eleanor said wisely. They came here with one story about their elderly mother, and now they're faced with evidence that contradicts everything they believed. That's not anger-inducing, it's world-shaking. As we finished our dessert, a decadent chocolate soufflé, I would never have indulged in before, I noticed my children and their spouses preparing to leave. They stopped by our table on their way out, a surprisingly united front considering their earlier shock. We'll see you tomorrow at 1, Christopher said, clearly having been briefed by Michael. The Terrace Cafe. Perfect, I replied with a smile. Nicole leaned down and kissed my cheek, an unusual gesture from my daughter-in-law, who had always been somewhat reserved. You look beautiful, Margaret, she said quietly. Whatever's going on with you, it suits you. After they left, Eleanor and I lingered over coffee, discussing the evening's events. The confrontation I'd anticipated had been replaced by something more nuanced, a shifting of power dynamics, a recalibration of relationships. My children had been forced to see me differently, but I wasn't sure yet what that would mean for our future. Back in our suite, I stood on the balcony looking out at the night sky, brilliant with stars unseen in the light-polluted skies of Oakridge Hollow. The mountain air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. In the distance, Pinehurst Lodge glowed with warm light, where my family was presumably still discussing their mysterious, transformed mother. What will you tell them? Tomorrow? Eleanor asked, joining me on the balcony with a nightcap. The truth, I said simply. About the lottery, yes, but more importantly, about how they've been treating me. It's time for honesty between us. As I prepared for bed, I found myself unexpectedly calm. The anticipation and nervous energy that had carried me through the past few days had settled into a quiet determination. Tomorrow would bring whatever it would bring. But for tonight, I had reclaimed something precious, my visibility, my dignity, my sense of self beyond motherhood. For the first time in years, I fell asleep thinking not about my children's lives and concerns, but about my own dreams and possibilities. I awoke early the next morning, just as sunrise began painting the eastern sky in delicate pinks and golds. Rather than turning over to catch a few more minutes of sleep as I usually would, I slipped out of bed, wrapped myself in the plush resort robe, and stepped onto the balcony to witness the mountains emerging from darkness. The valley below was still shrouded in mist, creating an ethereal landscape as the first rays of sunlight touched the highest peaks. The beauty was almost painful in its perfection, nature offering a daily miracle that I had somehow lived 71 years without experiencing. I'd missed so much, I realized. Not just mountains and luxury resorts, but countless smaller pleasures, sacrificed on the altar of practical necessity. Morning coffee enjoyed rather than gulped down between chores. Moments of stillness where the only purpose was appreciation of beauty. The simple act of putting my own desires first occasionally, without guilt or justification. Eleanor joined me a little while later, carrying 2 steaming mugs. "The front desk arranged coffee," she said, handing me one. "I figured you might need fortification for today's summit meeting." I smiled at her choice of words. Summit meeting, appropriate given our location. We sipped in companionable silence, watching the mist gradually burn away as the sun rose higher. Below, the resort was coming to life, staff preparing outdoor areas. Early risers heading toward the hiking trails. The distant sound of a delivery truck backing up to the kitchen entrance. "Have you decided what you'll wear for your confrontation?" Eleanor asked eventually. I considered. Yesterday's elegant dress had served its purpose for the initial shock value. Today called for something different, still polished but less formal. Projecting confidence without seeming like I was trying too hard. The cream linen pants, I think. With that coral blouse, Vivian said, brought out the warmth in my complexion. Eleanor nodded approvingly. Perfect. Sophisticated but approachable. After breakfast, I declined Eleanor's offer to accompany me to the meeting. This conversation needed to happen between me and my children alone, without audience or allies, on either side. She understood, planning instead to enjoy the spa facilities while I dealt with family matters. "Just promise you'll give me a full report," she said as we parted ways in the lobby. I arrived at the Terrace Cafe 15 minutes early, selecting a table somewhat removed from other diners. The outdoor space overlooked the resort's gardens, with mountains forming a dramatic backdrop. Aspen trees with their newly golden leaves provided dappled shade, and stone fire pits stood ready for evening gatherings when the mountain air would turn chilly. The setting was beautiful, relaxed, yet refined. The perfect, neutral ground for what promised to be a difficult conversation. I ordered mint tea while waiting, using the time to center myself, to remember the points I wanted to make without being sidetracked by potential defensiveness or manipulations. Christopher arrived first, punctual as always. He'd changed from last night's formal wear into what I recognized as his serious business attire. Khakis and a button-down shirt with sleeves rolled to the elbows, his "I'm approachable but still in charge" uniform. "Mom," he said, taking the seat across from me. His eyes still held that disconcerted look, as if he couldn't quite reconcile the woman before him with the mother he thought he knew. "Christopher," I replied warmly. "Did you sleep well?" "Not particularly," he admitted. "We were up late, talking." I imagined the scene, my children and their spouses dissecting my appearance and behavior over drinks, theorizing about what could possibly have transformed their predictable mother into this unfamiliar version. Rebecca arrived next, slightly, breathless, her architect's portfolio tucked under her arm as if she'd come from a client meeting rather than a family vacation. Then Michael, sliding into the fourth chair with a cautious smile. A server appeared to take their drink orders, and we engaged in stiff small talk about the weather and the resort amenities until she returned with their beverages. Once we were alone again, Christopher cleared his throat, assuming his natural role as family spokesperson. "So, Mom, you wanted to talk." I took a careful sip of my tea, looking at each of their faces in turn. These adults I'd created, raised, loved beyond measure, yet who had somehow come to see me as less than a complete person. Yes, I said simply. I think it's time we had an honest conversation about how things have been between us. Rebecca shifted uncomfortably. If this is about the anniversary weekend, we've already admitted we handled it poorly. We should have included you from the start. This isn't just about the weekend, I replied. Though that was certainly the catalyst, this is about a pattern that's been developing for years now. What pattern? Michael asked, genuine confusion in his expression. The pattern of gradually diminishing me, I explained, keeping my voice gentle but direct. Of seeing me as less capable, less relevant, less entitled to my own agency. Of making decisions about my life without consulting me, because surely, you know better than your elderly mother. Christopher's brow furrowed. That's a pretty serious accusation, Mom. We've only ever wanted what's best for you. I believe that's true, I acknowledged. But you've been deciding what's best based on assumptions about my capabilities and preferences, not by actually asking me. I turned to Rebecca. Last Christmas, when you upgraded my phone without asking and then set it to what you called senior mode with enlarged text and simplified apps, I've been using computers since before you were born, Rebecca. I taught computer skills at the community center for 5 years after retirement. Her cheeks colored slightly. I was just trying. To help, I know. But you never asked if I needed that kind of help. I looked at Michael. When you started explaining basic current events to me as if I couldn't possibly understand modern issues. I read 3 newspapers daily and follow several political analysts online. He had the grace to look embarrassed. I didn't realize. And Christopher, I continued, turning to my eldest. When you took over my finances after I mentioned having trouble with the new online banking portal, I wasn't asking you to manage my money. I was commenting on a poorly designed website. A heavy silence fell over the table. My children exchanged glances, a familiar family shorthand I recognized from decades of watching them communicate without words. Mom, Christopher finally said, his voice careful. I think I speak for all of us when I say we never intended to make you feel diminished. We were trying to help, to make your life easier. I understand that, I said. But helping someone doesn't mean taking over. It doesn't mean assuming incompetence. Fair enough, Michael conceded. But that still doesn't explain all this. He gestured vaguely at my appearance, at the upscale resort around us. The clothes, the hair, the 5-star accommodations. This isn't you, Mom. Isn't it? I asked quietly. Or is it just not the version of me you've become comfortable with? Rebecca leaned forward, her analytical mind clearly working to solve the puzzle I'd presented. Something's happened, she said. Something beyond just being upset about the anniversary weekend. I smiled slightly. She had always been perceptive, my middle child. Even as a small girl, she'd been the one to notice. When classroom dynamics shifted, when friendships were fracturing, when I was pretending to be fine but wasn't. You're right, I acknowledged. Something has happened. Something that made me realize how much I've allowed myself to be defined by what others needed me to be, rather than who I actually am or could be. I reached into my handbag and withdrew. A folded document, a copy of the lottery confirmation and deposit slip Mr. Caldwell had prepared for me. I placed it on the table between us. 3 weeks ago, I won the Silverleaf State Lottery, I said simply. After taxes, $925,000. Their reactions would have been comical under different circumstances. Christopher's jaw actually dropped. Rebecca blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision. Michael let out a strangled sound somewhere between a gasp and a cough. You... what? Christopher managed. I won the lottery, I repeated. Quite unexpectedly, I now have financial resources I never imagined possible. Why didn't you tell us? Rebecca asked, sounding almost hurt. I was going to surprise you at the anniversary. Celebration, I explained. I thought it would be a joyful revelation. A chance to perhaps help each of you with something meaningful. College funds for the grandchildren, perhaps, or that down payment you've been saving for, Michael. I paused, meeting each of their eyes. But then I learned I wasn't welcome at the celebration, that I was too old, too slow, too much of a potential embarrassment to be included in a family gathering. The full impact of what they'd done seemed to hit them simultaneously. The realization that their mother, whom they'd excluded based on perceived frailty and irrelevance, was now a woman of significant means who had every right to feel deeply wounded by their dismissal. "Mom, we had no idea," Christopher began, his voice strained. "Of course you didn't," I agreed. "But would it have changed anything if you had known? Would I have been welcome if you'd known I had money to contribute? And if so, what does that say about how you value me?" The questions hung in the air between us, uncomfortable but necessary. My children, usually so quick with explanations and justifications, sat in uncharacteristic silence. "I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty," I continued after a moment, "or to suggest that my worth should be measured by my bank account. I'm telling you because this unexpected windfall forced me to confront some difficult truths about my life and my relationships, including with the three of you." "What kind of truths?" Michael asked, his expression troubled. "That I've spent decades putting everyone else first, to the point where I lost sight of myself as a person with my own desires and capacities," I said. "That I've allowed myself to be relegated to the background of all your lives, grateful for whatever attention you could spare. That I've been complicit in my own diminishment by never asserting my needs or setting boundaries." I took a sip of my tea, which had grown cold. But most importantly, I realized it's not too late to change, to reclaim parts of myself I'd set aside, to experience things I'd always deferred to someday. Rebecca reached across the table and took my hand. "Mom, I don't know what to say, except that I'm sorry. Really sorry." The genuine remorse in her voice touched me. Of my three children, Rebecca had always been the most like me, responsible to a fault, putting others first, carrying the weight of expectations sometimes too heavy for her shoulders. "I'm not looking for apologies," I said gently. "I'm looking for recognition, for respect, for relationships with my adult children that don't position me as either a burden or an afterthought." Christopher, ever practical, seemed to be processing the financial implications. "Have you made plans for the money? You should talk to my financial advisor. This kind of windfall requires careful management." I couldn't help but smile. Some habits were deeply ingrained. "I've already met with Mr. Caldwell at Oakridge Community Bank. We've established a comprehensive financial plan." "Caldwell?" Christopher frowned. "But he's just a small-town banker. For this amount, you need specialized expertise in wealth management. Mr. Caldwell has been managing my modest affairs with respect and care for 20 years, I replied calmly. He's brought in appropriate investment specialists, and together we've developed a plan that aligns with my values and goals. But, he began again. "Christopher," I interrupted gently, "this is exactly what I'm talking about. I appreciate your concern, but the decisions about my money are mine to make, not yours to direct." He subsided, looking somewhat chastened. Michael, always the peacemaker, stepped into the silence. "So what happens now, Mom? With the money? With everything?" It was the question I'd been waiting for. The opening to share not just what had happened, but what I hoped might happen next. "Now," I said, "we begin again. With clear eyes and honest hearts. I'm still your mother, and I still love you all more than I could possibly express. But I'm also Margaret Thornfield, a woman with her own life to live, however many years that might be." "You mean you're not planning to share the money with us?" Christopher asked, his tone careful but with an undercurrent I recognized immediately. The same slight tension he'd had as a teenager when asking for something he wasn't sure he deserved. I met his gaze directly. "I didn't say that, but I think We need to acknowledge that there's a difference between sharing from generosity and sharing from obligation. Rebecca, always quick to read a room, touched her brother's arm. Chris, I don't think that's what Mom's saying at all. It's not, I confirmed. What I'm saying is that before we discuss any financial matters, we need to repair what's broken in our relationship. Money can't fix the underlying issues. Michael leaned forward. What do you want from us, Mom? Just tell us, and we'll try to make it right. His directness was refreshing, but also revealing. They still wanted a simple solution. A checklist of behaviors to correct, perhaps, or a series of apologies to offer, rather than understanding that what had happened between us was more complex than that. It's not about a specific list of demands, I explained. It's about seeing me, truly seeing me, as a complete person with agency and capability. It's about consulting with me rather than deciding for me. It's about including me because you value my presence, not out of duty or, I gestured to the document still lying on the table, financial interest. Christopher ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he'd had since childhood when confronted with a problem he couldn't immediately solve. This is a lot to process, Mom. The lottery win, these feelings you've been having, this whole new persona. It's not a persona, Christopher, I said gently. This is who I've always been beneath the practical exterior. The woman who wanted to travel but couldn't afford it. Who loved beautiful things but chose to spend on your needs instead. Who had dreams beyond motherhood, but put them aside because your father died, and someone had to keep everything together. For the first time, I saw genuine recognition in his eyes. Not just of my words, but of me. Of the mother who had existed before he was born, who had remained present beneath the layers of responsibility and sacrifice. I never thought about you having dreams beyond us, he admitted quietly. That sounds terrible when I say it out loud. Not terrible, I corrected. Human. Children naturally see their parents primarily in relation to themselves. But at some point that view needs to expand. A server approached to ask if we wanted to order lunch, providing a momentary reprieve from the intensity of our conversation. We each requested salads or sandwiches, more out of social convention than actual hunger. Once she departed, Rebecca returned to the discussion. So, what happens with the anniversary weekend now? She asked. Would you consider joining us at Pinehurst? We could make adjustments to include you in the activities. I considered her offer. The old Margaret would have jumped at this invitation, grateful for any inclusion regardless of how it came about. But the new Margaret recognized it for what it was, a belated attempt at correction rather than a genuine desire for my company. I think it's best if you continue with your planned celebration, I said. Eleanor and I have our own itinerary for the weekend, but perhaps we could all have dinner together tomorrow evening? The grandchildren too? You don't want to join the full weekend? Michael seemed surprised. I appreciate the invitation, but no, I replied. This weekend was planned without me, and hastily including me now would change the dynamic for everyone. Besides, I smiled, I've discovered I quite enjoy the activities at Evergreen Peaks. I have a pottery class this afternoon and a wine tasting this evening. Their expressions were a mixture of relief and confusion. Relief that I wasn't insisting on inserting myself into their carefully planned weekend. Confusion that I wasn't more eager for the connection they were now offering. Pottery? Christopher repeated, as if I'd said I was taking up rocket science. Yes, I've always wanted to try it. I glanced at my watch. In fact, I should finish lunch in time to change before the class begins. Our food arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. The grandchildren's recent activities, Rebecca's latest architectural project, Michael's new house. The familiar rhythm of family discussion resumed, but with a subtle difference. They were speaking to me with a new attentiveness, testing the waters of relating to me as a peer rather than as just their mother. As we were finishing our meals, Christopher broached the subject that had clearly been weighing on him. About the lottery winnings, he began cautiously. Do you have specific plans for how you'll use it? I dabbed my napkin to my lips before answering. Some, yes. I've already paid off my mortgage. I'm planning some home renovations. A new roof, updated kitchen, that sort of thing. And I'm considering some travel. Eleanor and I were discussing a Mediterranean cruise next spring. That all sounds wonderful, Rebecca said sincerely. You deserve it. Thank you, I replied. I'm also establishing college funds for each of the grandchildren. Mr. Caldwell is helping me set up the appropriate trusts. Their faces brightened at this, particularly Christopher's. His twins were approaching high school age, making college expenses a looming reality. That's extremely generous, Mom, he said. They're my grandchildren, I responded simply. Of course, I want to help secure their futures if I can. But I want to be clear about something. I looked at each of them in turn. This money doesn't change who I am or my place in this family. I'm not suddenly a bank or a financial resource to be managed. I'm still just your mother, making my own decisions about my life and my resources. Michael, always the most emotionally intuitive of my children, nodded. We understand, Mom, or at least we're trying to. I believed him. Of the three, Michael had seemed least surprised by my transformation, perhaps because he had always seen me more clearly than the others. As the youngest, he'd witnessed more of my independence after his siblings left home, more of the person. I was beyond just Mom. As lunch concluded, we made arrangements for dinner the following evening. 7 p.m. at the Evergreen Peaks main restaurant, with all the grandchildren included. The conversation had not resolved everything, but it had opened a door to greater understanding. They were seeing me with new eyes, and I was allowing myself to be seen more fully than I had in decades. We parted in the resort lobby with somewhat awkward hugs. Physical affection had never come easily in our family after the children grew up, and promises to text details about dinner. As they headed toward the entrance, I heard Christopher say to his siblings, "Did anyone else feel like they were meeting Mom for the first time?" His question brought a small smile to my face as I made my way toward the activities center for my pottery class. In some ways, they were meeting me for the first time. The authentic Margaret, who had been gradually obscured by the roles and responsibilities of motherhood and widowhood. The pottery studio was bright and airy, with large windows overlooking the mountains. 8 wheels were set up around the room, each with a stool and basic tools. The instructor, a woman about my age with silver hair twisted into an artistic knot, welcomed me with clay-stained hands. "First time?" she asked, helping me don an apron. "First time with pottery," I confirmed. "First time with many things lately," she smiled knowingly. "Ah, one of those phases. I went through something similar after my divorce at 55. Suddenly realized I'd spent decades being someone else's idea of who I should be." "Exactly," I said, surprised by her perception. "Did the pottery help? Creating something with your own hands? Watching it take shape according to your vision? There's power in that, especially for women who've spent their lives molding themselves to others' expectations." Her words resonated deeply as I took my place at a wheel. The instructor demonstrated the basic techniques, centering the clay, opening the form, pulling up the walls of what would eventually become a small bowl. My first attempts were predictably wobbly, the clay resisting my inexperienced hands, collapsing when I applied too much pressure or insufficient support. "Don't get discouraged," the instructor advised, noticing my frustration. "The clay remembers every touch, every hesitation. It responds to confidence." I tried again, focusing on maintaining even pressure, on moving with rather than against the material. Gradually, under my increasingly sure hands, the lump of earthen clay began to take form, imperfect, slightly asymmetrical, but definitely a vessel of my own creation. "Look at that," the instructor said approvingly. "You're a natural." The simple praise warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. How long had it been since someone had commented on my abilities rather than my limitations? Since someone had seen potential rather than constraints? By the end of the 2-hour class, I had created 3 small pieces: a bowl, a vase, and what the instructor charitably called an organic form, but was really just an interesting lump. They would be fired in the kiln and available for glazing tomorrow if I wished to return. "I'll be back," I promised, already looking forward to completing the process, to adding color and permanence to my creations. As I left the studio, clay, dust still clinging to my hands despite thorough washing, I felt a profound sense of satisfaction. The meeting with my children had been necessary and productive. The pottery class had been challenging and rewarding. Both experiences represented aspects of the new life I was building, one where relationships were more honest, where I explored long-deferred interests, where I created rather than merely maintained. Eleanor was waiting in our suite when I returned, eager for details about both encounters. "So, how did the summit meeting go?" she asked, pouring us each a glass of the complimentary wine the resort had delivered. "Better than expected, worse than hoped for," I replied, sinking onto the sofa. They were shocked about the lottery, of course. Christopher's first thought was how I should manage it, or rather, how he could help me manage it. Eleanor rolled her eyes. "Of course it was. Did you set him straight?" "As gently as possible," I confirmed. I told them about the college funds for the grandchildren, which helped smooth things over. "We're having dinner with everyone tomorrow evening." "And the pottery class?" I held up my still slightly clay-stained hands. "Messier than expected, more satisfying than I could have imagined. I made a bowl that actually looks like a bowl, more or less." Eleanor raised her glass. "To Margaret 2.0, mother, potter, financial. Independent and general disruptor of expectations." I laughed and clinked my glass against hers. "I'm not sure about disruptor, but I am enjoying the expressions on people's faces when I don't behave as expected." As evening approached, I changed for the wine tasting, selecting tailored black pants and a silk blouse in a rich burgundy shade. The events of the day had left me feeling both emotionally drained and curiously energized, exhausted from the vulnerability of the lunch conversation, yet invigorated by the creative satisfaction of the pottery class. The wine tasting would be a perfect balance, I thought, social enough to keep me engaged, structured enough that I wouldn't have to make constant conversation. A chance to continue my education in life's pleasures, long deferred but now, finally, mine to explore. The wine tasting proved to be even more enjoyable than I'd anticipated. Held in a private room adjacent to the resort's wine cellar, the event featured selections from local vineyards paired with small plates of regional specialties. I found myself seated at a table with 2 other couples and a gentleman traveling alone, all of us strangers united by curiosity and appreciation for fine wines. "I'm Howard," said the solo traveler, a distinguished-looking man perhaps a few years older than myself, retired history professor on a grand tour of mountain wineries. "Margaret," I replied, accepting his handshake. "Widow on a belated journey of self-discovery." He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. Self-discovery is the best reason for any journey. Finding ourselves is the one expedition where getting lost is often the point. His observation struck me as both profound and playful, setting the tone for an evening of surprisingly stimulating conversation. As we tasted our way through crisp whites, complex reds, and a surprisingly excellent local sparkling wine, Howard and I discovered shared interests in history, literature, and travel. The other couples at our table were pleasant but less engaged, more focused on the wines themselves than the conversation. "You mentioned you're a widow," Howard said as we sampled a robust Cabernet. "Recent loss?" 8 years, I replied. "Though in some ways I've only recently started processing what that means for the second act of my life." He nodded, understanding. 18 years for me. My Claire had cancer, quick and brutal. Afterward, I buried myself in teaching for a decade, before realizing she would have hated seeing me retreat from life that way. That sounds familiar, I admitted. After Robert died, my identity narrowed to just mother and provider. I'm only now remembering there was a Margaret before those roles, with interests and dreams of her own. The resurrection of the self, Howard said, raising his glass slightly. A worthy endeavor at any age, but particularly courageous in our later years when everyone expects us to quietly fade into predictable patterns. I was struck by how accurately he'd characterized my recent transformation. That's exactly it. My children were quite shocked to discover their predictable mother had unexpected dimensions. Children often struggle the most with parental evolution, he observed. They rely on us to be the fixed point in their universe. When we change, it forces them to recalibrate their entire understanding of the world. As the evening progressed, I found myself increasingly drawn to Howard's thoughtful insights and gentle humor. There was no flirtation, just the simple pleasure of connecting with someone who seemed to understand the journey I was on without needing extensive explanation. When the tasting concluded, he asked if I might join him for coffee in the lounge. I hesitated only briefly before accepting. Eleanor was enjoying a mystery novel in our suite and had encouraged me to live a little, as she put it. The lounge featured comfortable seating around a magnificent stone fireplace, where a fire crackled despite the mild evening. Through vast windows, the mountains were silhouettes against a star-filled sky, creating a postcard-perfect backdrop for conversation. "So what initiated this journey of self-discovery?" Howard asked once we were settled with our coffees. "Something specific, or just the gradual realization that time is precious?" I considered how much to share with this stranger who somehow didn't feel like a stranger. Both, I suppose. A lottery win provided means I never expected to have, and my children's decision to exclude me from a family gathering provided motivation to re-examine my place in their lives, and my own. His eyebrows rose slightly. A lottery win. That's quite the catalyst. It removed excuses, I explained. For decades, I couldn't travel, couldn't explore interests, couldn't indulge in simple pleasures because there simply wasn't money for such things. Suddenly, that limitation was gone, and I had to confront how many of my life's constraints were actually self-imposed. "Financial freedom forcing existential reckoning," he said with a small smile. "I've seen that pattern before, though usually in much younger people. What's the verdict so far on this new chapter?" Terrifying, exhilarating, overdue. I sipped my coffee, appreciating its rich complexity. I keep discovering capabilities I'd forgotten I possessed, interests I'd set aside. So long ago they feel new again? Like what? "Today I tried pottery for the first time," I said. "Tomorrow I'm going back to glaze my pieces. I've been reading novels again, not just the practical nonfiction that filled my shelves for years. I'm considering learning to paint. Perhaps even traveling overseas, something I've dreamed about since I was a girl." Howard listened attentively, his expression thoughtful. "You're experiencing a renaissance, Margaret. A rebirth of possibilities." That sounds very grand for a woman discovering she enjoys pottery and good wine, I laughed. "Don't diminish it," he said seriously. "In a culture that expects people our age to contract, to become smaller versions of ourselves with each passing year, expansion is revolutionary." We talked until the lounge began to empty, other guests drifting off to their rooms as the evening deepened. Howard shared stories of his travels since retirement, walking tours in England, cooking classes in Tuscany, archaeological sites in Greece, not extravagant luxury travel, but thoughtful experiences that had enriched his understanding of both history and himself. "Would you consider joining me for breakfast tomorrow?" he asked as we finally prepared to part ways. "I've enjoyed our conversation immensely." "I'd like that," I replied, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. Though I should warn you, I have plans to meet my children and grandchildren for dinner tomorrow evening. Family drama may have depleted my conversational abilities by morning, he chuckled. All the more reason to fortify yourself with good company beforehand. Shall we say 8:30 in the main restaurant? As I made my way back to my suite, I felt a curious lightness. The connection with Howard had been unexpected. Not romantic exactly, though there was an undeniable pleasure in being seen and appreciated by an intelligent, perceptive man. Rather, it was the simple joy of meeting someone who seemed to be traveling a parallel path, who understood this late-life journey of rediscovery without requiring elaborate explanation. Eleanor was still awake when I returned, reading in the living area of our suite. "You're back late," she observed, placing a bookmark in her novel. "Good tasting?" "Excellent," I replied, slipping off my shoes with a contented sigh. "I met someone interesting, a retired history professor named Howard. We're having breakfast. Together tomorrow." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up, her expression instantly mischievous. "Margaret Thornfield, are you telling me you have a breakfast date?" "It's not a date," I protested, feeling an unexpected flush warm my cheeks. "Just breakfast conversation with a like-minded person." She hummed skeptically. "And did this like-minded person happen to be male, single, and approximately our vintage?" "Yes to all three, but that doesn't automatically make it romantic," I insisted. "We simply enjoyed talking. He's traveled extensively since retiring, has interesting perspectives on history and culture." "Handsome?" she pressed, clearly enjoying my discomfort. I considered Howard's appearance. Silver hair neatly trimmed, intelligent blue eyes behind tortoiseshell glasses, tall with good posture, casually elegant in a way that suggested comfort rather than vanity, dignified, I said finally. Eleanor laughed outright. "Oh my, he is handsome." Dignified is widow speak for I noticed but don't want to admit it. "Stop it," I chided, though I couldn't help smiling. "It's just breakfast." Just breakfast with a dignified, well-traveled, intellectual man who clearly enjoyed your company. "Enough to request more of it," she summarized. "Call it what you want, but I haven't seen that particular glow on your face since Robert was alive." I moved to the balcony doors, gazing out at the night rather than addressing Eleanor's observation. Directly, was she right? Had there been some spark of attraction beneath the intellectual connection? And if so, was I even remotely prepared to acknowledge such a possibility? "I'm 71 years old," I said quietly, more to myself than to Eleanor. "Surely past the age for whatever this might be." Eleanor joined me at the window, her expression softening. "There's no expiration date on companionship, Maggie, on being seen and appreciated, on enjoying someone's presence and conversation." "It feels disloyal somehow," I admitted. "To Robert." "Robert has been gone 8 years, she reminded me gently. "He wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life alone. He loved you too much for that." I knew she was right. Robert had been a practical, loving man who had always put my happiness first. In our last conversations before his heart finally gave out, he had made me promise to keep living after he was gone. At the time, I had interpreted that as simply continuing to function, raising our children, maintaining our home, persevering despite his absence. Now I wondered if he had meant something more profound, not just surviving, but truly living. "It's just breakfast," I repeated, though the words sounded less convincing even to my own ears. "Of course it is," Eleanor agreed, her tone suspiciously innocent. "And I expect a full report afterward." The following morning, I woke early again, feeling a flutter of nervous anticipation that I hadn't experienced in decades. I spent more time than usual selecting my outfit, finally settling on tailored navy pants and a soft cashmere sweater in a pale blue that brightened my eyes. I applied minimal makeup, just enough to enhance rather than conceal, and arranged my newly styled hair with careful attention. Just breakfast. I reminded my reflection, who didn't appear entirely convinced. Howard was already seated when I arrived at the restaurant, rising politely as I approached. His smile was warm, crinkling the corners of his eyes in a way that suggested it was a frequent expression. "Good morning, Margaret. I reserved a table by the windows. The view of the mountains is particularly beautiful in the morning light." The breakfast was delightful. Excellent food, stimulating conversation, and a growing sense of ease between us. Howard shared more about his academic career, his 2 grown sons who lived on the East Coast, his gradual transition from grief to a new kind of life after Claire's death. I found myself opening up as well, describing my children with more nuance and affection than I had the previous evening, explaining the complicated dynamics that had led to our current situation. "So tonight is the big family dinner," he noted as we lingered over second cups of coffee. "How are you feeling about it?" "Cautiously optimistic," I replied. "Yesterday's conversation with my children was difficult, but necessary. I think we're moving toward better understanding, though old patterns don't change overnight." "What do you hope will come from tonight's gathering?" I considered his question carefully. "I hope my grandchildren will see that their grandmother is more than just an elderly relative to visit on holidays. I hope my children will begin to relate to me as a person, not just a mother. Mostly, I hope we can begin building relationships based on who we all actually are, rather than the roles we've been assigned." Howard nodded thoughtfully. "Those are worthy aspirations. Family systems are remarkably resistant to change, but not immutable. Your transformation has already forced a recalibration. Tonight continues that process." After breakfast, we walked together through the resort gardens, enjoying the crisp morning air and continuing our conversation. There was a comfortable rhythm to our interaction, a balance of sharing and listening that felt both stimulating and natural. "I'll be heading back to Boulder tomorrow," Howard mentioned as we completed our circuit of the gardens. "But I've very much enjoyed meeting you, Margaret. Would it be presumptuous to ask if we might stay in touch?" The question caused another flutter of that unfamiliar feeling. "I'd like that," I said. "I've enjoyed our conversations too." We exchanged contact information, and Howard hesitated before adding, "I host a small dinner gathering for friends each month. Nothing formal, just good food and interesting conversation. The next one is in 2 weeks. Would you consider attending? You'd be welcome to bring Eleanor as well." The invitation surprised me, concrete, specific, an actual extension of our brief acquaintance into the future. "Boulder is several hours from Oakridge Hollow," I noted. "It is," he acknowledged, "though I find increasingly that experiences worth having are worth traveling for." Looking into his kind, intelligent eyes, I found myself nodding. "I'll need to check my calendar, but yes, I'd like to come. Thank you for the invitation." We parted with warm handshakes and promises to coordinate about the dinner party. As I watched him walk toward the activity center for his scheduled nature walk, I experienced a sensation I hadn't felt in years. A lightness, a sense of pleasant anticipation, the simple joy of connection with another adult who saw me clearly and found value in what he saw. "Just breakfast indeed," I murmured to myself, smiling as I turned toward the resort's pottery studio to glaze my creations from yesterday's class. The afternoon passed quickly as I glazed my pottery pieces, selecting colors that reflected my new sense of self, deep blues and rich burgundies rather than the safe neutrals I might have chosen in the past. The instructor seemed pleased with my choices, commenting on how well they would complement the forms I'd created. "Most first-timers stick with predictable color schemes," she noted. "You're being quite bold." "I'm discovering that bold suits me," I replied, carefully applying a final brushstroke to my bowl. Back in our suite, I found Eleanor packing her suitcase for our departure the next day. Our weekend getaway was drawing to a close, though it felt as if we'd been in the mountains for much longer. So much had changed in such a short time. "How was your breakfast with Professor Dignified?" she asked, folding a sweater with precision. His name is Howard, I reminded her, though I couldn't suppress a smile. And it was lovely. We're staying in touch. He's invited me to a dinner party at his home in Boulder in 2 weeks. Eleanor abandoned her packing to stare at me. You're going? To a dinner party? In Boulder? I said I'd check my calendar, but yes, I think so. You're invited too if you'd like to come. She studied me for a moment, her expression softening. I think I'll let you handle this one on your own, Maggie. Some journeys are better taken solo. I felt a flutter of anxiety at the thought of driving to Boulder alone, attending a gathering of strangers in a new social context. But beneath the anxiety was a stronger current of anticipation. Howard's friends would likely be interesting people. The conversation would be stimulating. And his presence would be comforting, energizing. I wasn't quite ready to define it, but I knew I wanted to explore the connection further. You think I'm being foolish, I said, misinterpreting Eleanor's thoughtful silence. Quite the opposite, she replied. I think you're being brave. Bravery often looks like foolishness to those without the courage to try. As evening approached, I began preparing for the family dinner, selecting an outfit that struck the right balance. A flowing tunic in a rich emerald green over slim black pants, accessorized with a silver pendant Robert had given me for our 20th anniversary. I wanted to look polished, but not overly formal, to project confidence without intimidation. Eleanor offered to join us, but I declined. This gathering needed to be just family, without outside observers, to allow for authentic interaction. She understood, planning instead to enjoy room service and a movie in our suite. Just remember, she advised as I prepared to leave. You've already done the hard part. You've broken the pattern. Tonight isn't about convincing them of anything. It's just about being fully yourself in their presence. The main restaurant at Evergreen Peaks was different from Altitude, where we'd dined the previous evening. More relaxed, with a menu designed to appeal to a broader range of ages and tastes. I'd requested a round table in a relatively quiet corner, allowing conversation to flow while providing some privacy from other diners. I arrived first, deliberately early to compose myself and set the tone. The maitre d' showed me to our table, perfectly situated as requested, and I ordered a glass of wine to steady my nerves while waiting for my family to arrive. Christopher and Nicole appeared first with their 13-year-old twins, Adam and Emma. The children approached somewhat cautiously, clearly having been prepped about their grandmother's transformation, but still uncertain what to expect. You look different, Grandma, Emma said, studying me with the frank curiosity of adolescence. Do you like it? I asked, genuinely interested in her opinion. She considered the question seriously. Yeah, I do. You look like you're actually having fun. Her innocent observation touched me deeply. Had my demeanor been so obviously joyless before? Had my grandchildren grown up seeing me as someone who didn't experience fun or pleasure? Michael and Stephanie arrived next with their 8-year-old son Jacob, followed moments later by Rebecca and James with their 10-year-old daughter Lily. The children's reactions to my appearance ranged from Jacob's wide-eyed, "Wow, Grandma," to Lily's quieter, "I like your necklace." Once everyone was seated and drinks had been ordered, an awkward silence fell. The adults seemed unsure how to navigate this new territory, while the children watched with curious eyes, sensitive to the undercurrents they couldn't fully understand. "Thank you all for coming," I said finally, breaking the silence. "It means a great deal to have the whole family together." Christopher raised his glass. "To family," he offered. It was a safe toast, unobjectionable, but also somewhat impersonal. "To new beginnings," I countered gently, raising my own glass. Conversation gradually warmed as we ordered and began our meal. The children, less burdened by the complicated history between the adults, asked direct questions about my transformation. "Did you win $1 million, Grandma?" Jacob asked, his eyes wide. Dad said you got super rich. I laughed. Not quite 1 million, but yes, I did win the lottery. Are you going to buy a mansion? Or a Ferrari? Adam asked, clearly having given this considerable thought. I'm quite happy in my house, I replied. Though I am planning some renovations. As for cars, I think I'll stick with something more practical than a Ferrari. Mom's buying a new car? Rebecca asked, surprised. I'm considering it, I confirmed. My current one is 12 years old and not particularly reliable for longer trips. What kind of longer trips? Michael inquired, curiosity evident in his tone. I hesitated, then decided honesty was the best approach. Well, I've been invited to a dinner party in Boulder in 2 weeks, and Eleanor and I are discussing a Mediterranean cruise next spring. Boulder? Christopher repeated. Who do you know in Boulder? I felt a slight flush warm my cheeks. I met someone interesting here at the resort, a retired history professor named Howard. We've had some stimulating conversations. 4 adult. Head swiveled toward me in perfect synchronization, expressions ranging from surprise to confusion to, in Nicole's case, knowing amusement. You met someone? Rebecca asked, her voice rising slightly. A friend, I clarified, though even as I said it, I wondered if that was entirely accurate. We enjoyed talking and he hosts regular dinner gatherings. It's not romantic. But it could be? Stephanie suggested gently, her usually quiet presence suddenly very apparent at the table. I found myself unexpectedly flustered. That's not, we only just met. Grandma's blushing. Emma stage whispered to her twin, prompting giggles from all the children. I am not, I protested, though the warmth in my face suggested otherwise. Christopher looked uncomfortable, while Michael seemed thoughtful. It was Rebecca who surprised me most, reaching across the table to cover my hand with hers. Mom, that's wonderful, she said sincerely. You deserve companionship. Her simple affirmation moved me. Of all my children, Rebecca had been closest. To her father, taking his death perhaps the hardest. Her blessing, freely given, felt significant. It's just friendship, I maintained, though with less conviction than before. For now, Nicole added with a smile, earning her a sharp look from Christopher. The conversation shifted as our main courses arrived, the children eagerly describing their activities at Pinehurst Lodge while the adults listened and commented. I observed the interactions with new awareness, noting how Christopher still dominated discussions, how Rebecca mediated conflicts, how Michael quietly supported everyone. The family dynamics I'd always taken for granted now seemed both precious and problematic, comfort and constraint intertwined. As dessert was being served, Christopher cleared his throat. Mom, we've been talking. The 3 of us, I mean. He glanced at his siblings, who nodded encouragement. We owe you an apology. A real one, not just the reflexive kind we offered yesterday. This was unexpected. Christopher rarely admitted error, much less apologized for it. We've been taking you for granted, he continued. Worse than that, we've been diminishing you, making assumptions about your capabilities and preferences without asking. It wasn't intentional, but that doesn't make it acceptable. We got comfortable with a version of you that was convenient for us, Rebecca added. The always available grandmother, the predictable mother who never made waves or demanded attention. When you showed up here looking different, acting different, spending money on yourself without apology, it forced us to see how much we'd been projecting onto you, Michael finished. How little we'd been seeing the real you. I sat in stunned silence, moved by their clearly rehearsed but nonetheless sincere acknowledgement. It was exactly what I'd hoped for from our conversation yesterday, but hadn't quite dared to expect. Thank you, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. That means more to me than you know. We want to do better, Christopher said. We're not sure exactly how yet, but we want to try. That's all I can ask, I replied. that we all try to see each other more clearly, to make room for growth and change. I'm still your mother, and I still love you all more than I can express. That hasn't changed. But who I am beyond that role, that's what I'm rediscovering. The remainder of the evening unfolded with a new ease, conversations flowing naturally, laughter more frequent. The children, sensing the shift in atmosphere, grew more animated, sharing school stories and inside jokes. By the time we finished dessert, it felt almost like a normal family gathering. Almost, but with a new undercurrent of authenticity that had been missing before. As we prepared to part ways in the resort lobby, Christopher surprised me with a genuine embrace. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he whispered, "for standing up for yourself, for showing us there's more to life than what we thought we knew." His words touched me deeply. How long had I waited to hear my eldest child express pride in me, rather than the reverse? Michael hugged me next. "About this Howard person," he said quietly. "If he makes you happy, that's all that matters. But if you want, I could check him out, just to be safe," I laughed. "I'm 71, not 17. I think I can manage my own social life." "Just offering," he replied with a grin. Rebecca was last, her embrace lingering. "I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe I could come visit next weekend. Just me, no James or Lily. We could talk, really talk, like we did when I was young. I think I've forgotten how to do that, with you, with everyone." "I'd love that," I said sincerely. After final goodbyes and promises to text updates about return travels, I watched my family depart for Pinehurst Lodge, feeling a curious mixture of emotions: satisfaction at bridges rebuilt, hope for deeper connections ahead, but also a new independence. I loved them deeply, would always be their mother, but I was no longer defined solely by that role. The liberation in that realization was profound. Back in our suite, I found Eleanor waiting expectantly. "Well?" she demanded. "How did the grand family reunion go?" "Better than I could have hoped," I replied, slipping off my shoes with a contented sigh. They apologized, a real apology, not just words. And they seemed genuinely interested in knowing me, not just the mother they thought they knew. Miracles do happen, Eleanor remarked, though I suspect this one had less to do with divine intervention and more to do with your courage in disrupting patterns that weren't serving you anymore. As we finished packing for our departure the next morning, I found myself standing on the balcony one last time, gazing at the mountains now silhouetted against the night sky. The vista was magnificent, vast, ancient, enduring, making my individual life seem simultaneously insignificant and precious in its brevity. "What are you thinking about out there?" Eleanor called from inside. "Everything," I replied. "Nothing. Life. Changes." She joined me on the balcony, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Big thoughts for our last night. In paradise." "I've been wondering," I said slowly, "if I should consider moving." Eleanor's eyebrows shot up. "Moving? From Oakridge Hollow? After 42 years? It's just a thought," I clarified. "But Boulder is lovely. Or perhaps somewhere along the Front Range with mountain views. Somewhere new, where no one has preconceived notions about who Margaret Thornfield is or should be." "This wouldn't have anything to do with a certain dignified history professor, would it?" she asked, though her tone held more curiosity than teasing. "Partially," I admitted. "But not entirely. This weekend has shown me how many possibilities still exist, how many experiences I've yet to have. Maybe I need a fresh canvas to paint this next chapter." Eleanor considered this in silence for a moment. "You know, my lease is up in 6 months. If you're serious about relocating, maybe we could look at options together. Pool our resources for something with more space than either of us could afford alone." The suggestion surprised me. "You'd consider moving too?" "Why not? My arthritis doesn't love Oakridge winters, and watching you transform these past few weeks has been inspiring. Maybe I'm ready for a change too. We stood together in comfortable silence, contemplating futures suddenly wider with possibility than they had been just days ago. The mountains remained solid and unchanging, while our lives, once so settled, so predictable, now seemed wonderfully, terrifyingly fluid. 1 year later, I stood on the deck of my new home, watching the sunset paint the Front Range mountains in brilliant golds and purples. The house, a modern ranch style with large windows to capture the views, sat on 2 acres just outside Boulder. Eleanor occupied the guest cottage 50 yards away, close enough for company but separate enough for privacy. In my hand was an invitation to Christopher and Nicole's 11th anniversary celebration. This one, a simple family dinner at their home in Harborview Heights, with all of us explicitly included. Rebecca was bringing her new partner, a kind woman she'd met through work after separating from James 6 months ago. Michael and Stephanie would drive up from Bridgewater Valley with Jacob, who was excited to fish in the stream that ran through our property. Howard would be joining us as well, a development that had initially raised eyebrows among my children, but had gradually been accepted as they came to know him. Our relationship had evolved slowly from friendship to something deeper, though we maintained separate residences. At our age, independence and companionship seemed the perfect balance. Inside on the coffee table sat the bowl I'd made at Evergreen Peaks Resort, imperfect, slightly asymmetrical, but cherished for what it represented. Beside it was my most recent creation, a sculpted figure of a woman with arms outstretched, my improving skills now allowing for more complex forms. The lottery money had changed my circumstances dramatically, providing security and comfort I'd never imagined possible. But the real transformation had come from within, from the courage to reclaim parts of myself long set aside, to assert my worth in relationships that had grown unbalanced, to explore possibilities I'd thought were closed to me forever. At 72, I was more fully alive than I had been in decades. The children who had once dismissed me as too old now sought my advice, not just on practical matters, but on life's deeper questions. The grandchildren visited eagerly, finding in their grandmother not just a dispenser of cookies and hugs, but a model of reinvention and resilience. And in quiet moments like this one, watching the sun descend behind peaks that had witnessed countless human dramas unfold beneath them, I felt a profound gratitude, not just for the unexpected windfall that had removed financial constraints, but for the awakening it had triggered, the recognition that the greatest limitation I had faced was not age or circumstance, but my own willingness to accept the diminished role others had assigned me. The mountains before me would endure long after I was gone. But in the meantime, for whatever years remained to me, I would live fully present, fully engaged, fully myself. Not defined by others' expectations or my own fears, but by the simple, powerful truth that it is never too late to become the person you might have been all along. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.